The glass pitcher slipped from my fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor. Ice water spreading across the tile in a widening pool. I stood frozen at the doorway, my hand still extended in the throwing position, as the words from the backyard filtered through the screen door with perfect, devastating clarity. My 5-year-old grandson was crying, his small voice breaking with terror as he begged his mother to take him home before the monster got him. Good day, everyone. I am grateful you are here with me. Before we begin, I would really love to know where you are watching from. Comment your city below. Now, let me tell you about something that changed my life forever. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I crept closer to the screen door, my bare feet crunching on glass shards. I pressed my palm against the doorframe to steady myself. Through the mesh, I could see my daughter-in-law, Brittany, kneeling beside my grandson Tyler in the shade of the oak tree. She stroked his hair with exaggerated tenderness, her perfectly manicured nails catching the afternoon sunlight. Her 7-year-old daughter Sophia sat cross-legged on the grass beside them, eyes wide as saucers. Brittany's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried even more clearly than her normal tone. She pulled both children closer, glancing toward the house with a performance of fear that would have been laughable if it weren't destroying my world. You have to be very, very careful around Grandma Crystal, she said, her fingers tightening on Tyler's shoulders. Especially at night. My knees buckled. I lowered myself to the floor, heedless of the broken glass biting into my skin through my thin cotton dress. Blood bloomed in small circles on the fabric, but the pain felt distant, insignificant compared to the agony ripping through my chest. I had opened my home to this woman, welcomed her into my family when my son Marcus brought her home 6 years ago. I had bitten my tongue through countless slights, swallowed my pride when she corrected my cooking, my housekeeping, my very existence in her presence. Tyler's sobs intensified. Through the screen, I watched him bury his face against his mother's designer blouse. But Mommy, why would Grandma want to hurt us? His voice cracked on the words. Brittany smoothed his hair back from his forehead with practiced maternal concern. Her pink lips curved into something that might have passed for sadness to someone who didn't know better. But I saw the satisfaction glittering in her eyes, the triumph she couldn't quite suppress. It's not her fault, baby. Sometimes old people get confused. The hunger takes over. She tapped her temple significantly. That's why I need you to stay close to me when we visit. Never go off alone with her. The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter and hauled myself upright, my palms slick with sweat. Drops of blood tracked across the white tile as I moved to the sink, turning on the faucet to mask any sound I might make. My reflection stared back from the window above the basin. A 64-year-old woman with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes. The face of someone who had raised 3 children, buried a husband, survived breast cancer, and came out believing in the basic goodness of family. What a fool I had been. Sophia spoke for the first time, her voice uncertain. But Mommy, Grandma made us cookies yesterday, and she helped me with my homework. That's what makes it so dangerous, sweetheart. Brittany's tone carried the patience of a saint explaining fire to a child. She's very clever. She has to make you trust her first. I backed away from the sink, water still running, and pressed myself against the pantry door. The wooden frame dug into my shoulder blades through my cotton cardigan. My hands trembled as I wiped them on my jeans, the fabric absorbing both water and blood from the cut I'd gotten slicing vegetables before they'd arrived. Through the doorway, I watched Brittany gather both children close, her arms encircling them like a protective shield. Tyler nestled deeper into her embrace, while Sophia remained rigid, her small body a question mark of doubt. The girl's eyes drifted toward the kitchen, and I flattened myself further into the shadows, becoming as still as the canned goods behind me. Brittany stood, her movements fluid and graceful. She was 32 and beautiful in that cultivated way that required hours at the gym and careful attention to every calorie. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her yoga pants and fitted sweater suggested casual affluence. She'd been part of our family for 8 years now, married to my oldest son David since Sophia was a baby. I'd welcomed her with open arms. I'd babysat every weekend when they needed time alone. I'd stayed up all night when Marcus had colic, walking the floors of their house while Brittany slept. I'd paid for the kitchen renovation when David's business struggled during the pandemic. She guided the children toward the front door, her hand resting on Marcus's head with theatrical tenderness. "Let's go get ice cream before dinner. Grandma won't mind if we skip our visit today." "But we promised," Sophia protested, digging her pink sneakers into the carpet. Brittany crouched down, meeting Sophia's eyes with manufactured concern. "Honey, I need you to be my brave girl. Can you help me keep Tyler safe?" The weight of that responsibility settled visibly on Sophia's 8-year-old shoulders. Her spine straightened, and she reached for her brother's hand. The transformation cut through me like the knife that had opened my palm earlier. Brittany had just deputized my granddaughter as her accomplice. The front door clicked shut behind them. I counted to 30 before emerging from the kitchen, my legs unsteady beneath me. Their voices drifted through the window as they descended the porch steps, Marcus chattering about chocolate versus vanilla, while Brittany laughed, that musical sound that had once charmed everyone at family gatherings. I moved to the front window and eased back the curtain half an inch. Brittany's silver SUV sat in the driveway, gleaming in the afternoon sun. She buckled both children into their car seats with exaggerated care, her movements visible to any neighbor who might be watching. The performance of the devoted mother, the protector. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking fingers, the screen showing 3 missed calls from David. Before I could decide whether to call him back, a text appeared. "Mom, Brittany says you've been acting strange, forgetting things. She's worried about you." The phone nearly slipped from my grip. I caught it against my chest and sank onto the couch, the cushions exhaling beneath my weight. Outside, the SUV reversed down the driveway and disappeared around the corner. Storyblock 310. My fingers moved across the phone screen, typing and deleting 3 different responses before settling on something that wouldn't sound defensive or paranoid. The sunlight streaming through the window felt accusatory, illuminating dust motes that swirled like tiny witnesses to my inadequacy. I walked to the kitchen sink and ran cold water over my bandaged palm. The throbbing matched the rhythm of my pulse in my temples. The children's abandoned juice boxes sat on the counter, Marcus's still half full with the straw bent at his signature angle. I picked it up and felt its weight, this small remnant of his presence. The refrigerator hummed its monotonous song. I opened it and stared at the contents without seeing them. The casserole I'd made for dinner, the strawberries I'd bought because they were Sophia's favorite, the milk with 3 days left before expiration. Evidence of a grandmother who planned for visits, who anticipated needs. My phone buzzed again. Another text from David. "Can you come by tomorrow? We need to talk." The formal tone carved something hollow in my chest. I set the juice box down and gripped the counter's edge. My reflection wavered in the chrome toaster, a distorted version of myself, with eyes too wide and worry lines carved deeper than they'd been a year ago. Outside, Mrs. Chen from next door dragged her recycling bin to the curb. The wheels scraped against concrete, a sound that usually meant nothing, but now felt like an announcement of normalcy I couldn't claim. I watched her efficient movements, the way she brushed her hands together when finished, the casual wave she gave to someone passing on the sidewalk. I needed evidence, something tangible to counter whatever narrative Brittany was constructing. My laptop sat on the dining table, its screen dark and somehow accusatory. I opened it and waded through the agonizing boot-up sequence, each second stretched thin with urgency. The browser history showed my recent searches. Symptoms of gaslighting, parental alienation laws, grandparents' rights. The words glared back at me, proof of my suspicions, but also proof of my desperation. Anyone looking over my shoulder would see paranoia, not protection. I cleared the history with trembling fingers. The photo albums lined the bookshelf in chronological order, their spines faded from years of sunlight. I pulled down the most recent one and flipped through pages of birthday parties, holiday dinners, ordinary Tuesdays. Every photo showed Brittany beside me, her arm around my shoulders, her smile wide and genuine looking. In one picture from Marcus's 3rd birthday, she'd written in silver marker, "Best grandma ever." My throat constricted. I ran my finger over the words, feeling the slight raised texture of the ink. The clock on the wall ticked toward 4:30. David would be leaving his office soon, driving home to the house I'd helped them buy with my retirement savings. The down payment had been my gift, presented at their baby shower with Sophia sleeping in Brittany's belly. I remembered David's tears, his fierce hug, his whispered promise that I'd always be part of their lives. I closed the album and pressed my forehead against its cool surface. A knock at the door jolted me upright. Through the peephole, a distorted fisheye view showed a woman in a dark blazer holding a clipboard. She knocked again, 3 sharp raps that echoed through my quiet house. I opened the door 6 inches, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Crystal Campbell?" The woman's voice carried professional courtesy and underlying authority. "Yes. I'm Teresa Morales with Child Protective Services. I need to ask you some questions about a concern that was reported." The porch tilted beneath my feet. I gripped the doorframe, my bandaged palm leaving a smudge on the white paint. Behind Teresa, a sedan with government plates sat at the curb, its presence declaring everything to the watching neighborhood. "What kind of concern?" The words scraped out of my throat. Teresa consulted her clipboard, her pen tapping against the metal clasp. "A report was filed this afternoon regarding inappropriate statements made to minors. May I come in?" I stepped back and let the chain fall free. My fingers fumbled with the lock mechanism twice before it released. The door swung wide, and Teresa entered, her sensible black shoes clicking against my hardwood floor. She moved past me into the living room, her eyes scanning everything: the worn sofa where my grandchildren used to bounce, the coffee table still bearing faint crayon marks from Sophia's artwork, the framed school photos on the mantel. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pressed them against my thighs, feeling the rough cotton of my old work pants, the same pair I'd worn to clean houses for 30 years before my knees gave out. Teresa settled onto the edge of my armchair, back straight, clipboard resting on her knee like a judgment waiting to be written. "Mrs. Campbell, I need you to tell me about your relationship with your grandchildren. When did you last see them?" The question drove into my chest like a nail. I remained standing, unable to sit, unable to move away from the door that suddenly felt like my only exit. "2 weeks ago, they came for Sunday dinner." Teresa wrote something, her pen making quick scratching sounds. "And how did that visit go?" My mind replayed that afternoon. Sophia running through my kitchen, Tyler begging for my peach cobbler. their laughter filling spaces that had been silent too long. Then Brittany's face when she picked them up, that cold mask sliding into place, her hand gripping Sophia's shoulder tight enough to leave marks. It was good. We cooked together, played in the yard. My voice sounded hollow, defensive. Teresa looked up from her notes, her brown eyes measuring me. Did you say anything unusual to the children? Anything that might have frightened them? The accusation hung between us like smoke. I moved to the mantel, my fingers finding Sophia's most recent school photo. 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, hair in the braids I'd taught her to make herself during those precious afternoons when David still brought them over without asking permission first. I told them stories about my grandmother, about growing up in Alabama, about... Did you tell them you practiced witchcraft? The word hit like a slap. I spun around, nearly knocking the photo frame from its perch. What? Teresa's expression remained neutral, professional, unmoved by the shock radiating through my body. The report states you told the children you were a witch, that you made potions, that you could put curses on people who disrespected you. My breath came in short, painful gasps. The room tilted, walls pressing inward. I gripped the mantel edge, splinters from the old wood digging into my unbandaged palm. That's not... I never... Mrs. Campbell, I need you to sit down. But I couldn't sit. I paced instead, 3 steps to the window, 3 steps back, my body moving because stopping meant collapsing. Through the glass, I saw Mrs. Henderson across the street, partially hidden behind her curtain, watching. The whole neighborhood would know by tomorrow. The black woman visited by CPS. The grandmother who scared children. My grandmother was a healer. The words tumbled out, desperate, trying to build truth against lies. She knew herbs, plants, natural remedies. I told Sophia about the tea she made, the poultices for cuts and bruises, that's all. Teresa wrote more notes. Each stroke of her pen felt like another door closing. Did you give the children anything to drink or eat that contained herbs or plants? Chamomile tea. Sophia couldn't sleep. She asked for something warm. My voice cracked, remembering Sophia's small hands wrapped around my grandmother's old mug, the one with the chipped rim that I'd drunk from as a child myself. Anything else? The interrogation continued, each question peeling away layers of my life, examining every interaction, every word, every moment I'd spent loving my grandchildren. Teresa asked about my health, my finances, whether I lived alone, whether I had any history of mental illness. Her pen never stopped moving, documenting everything I said and everything I didn't say. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands. A text from David. Mom, we need to talk. Not now. Give it time. Not now. Give it time. As if time would erase whatever poison Brittany had poured into this situation. I showed Teresa the message, holding the phone out like evidence of my innocence. She barely glanced at it. Mrs. Campbell, I need to see the rest of your house. Assist and I led Teresa through the hallway, my fingers trailing along the wall for balance. The photographs watched us pass. David's graduation, the twins' first birthday, Christmas dinners where we'd all smiled at the camera. In each frame, Brittany stood slightly apart, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. How had I missed that distance? How long had she been collecting my words, twisting them into something dark? Teresa paused at my bedroom doorway, scanning the space with clinical efficiency. The quilt my grandmother had stitched lay across the bed, its patterns of stars and moons now seeming sinister under her scrutiny. She moved to my dresser, opening drawers with gloved hands. My undergarments, my medications, my private life, all exposed and cataloged. The spare room came next. Toys scattered across the floor from Sophia and Tyler's last visit 3 weeks ago. Building blocks in a half-finished tower, coloring books with pages of princesses and dragons. Teresa photographed everything, the camera flash making shadows leap across the walls. She knelt beside the toy chest, lifting out each item. The wooden puzzle I'd made in my woodworking class. The stuffed rabbit with one ear shorter than the other. The collection of smooth stones we'd gathered from the creek last summer. "What's this?" Teresa held up a small glass jar containing dried lavender. "I keep it for the smell. The children helped me pick it last year." My throat tightened. "We pressed flowers together, made bookmarks." She unscrewed the lid, sniffed, then sealed it inside an evidence bag. The plastic crinkled as she wrote on the label. Another piece of my life taken, cataloged, judged. The kitchen drew her attention longest. She opened every cabinet, examined every jar and bottle in my pantry. The chamomile tea sat on the counter, where I'd left it after Sophia's last sleepover. Teresa photographed it from multiple angles before bagging it. My grandmother's recipe book lay open on the counter. Remedies for coughs, teas for headaches, poultices for bruises. All written in her careful script, the ink faded but still legible. "May I?" Teresa didn't wait for my answer before photographing each page. I watched her document my grandmother's legacy, each flash preserving and condemning simultaneously. The recipes that had soothed scraped knees and upset stomachs for 3 generations now looked like evidence of something sinister. Witch's brew, dark magic, whatever story Brittany had crafted. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw David's sedan in my driveway. He climbed out, his shoulders hunched against the cold November wind. Behind him, Brittany emerged from the passenger side, her phone already in her hand. She was recording. My hands clenched into fists. The ceramic mug on the counter, Sophia's favorite with the painted butterflies, pressed into my palm as I gripped the edge of the sink. David approached the front door, but Brittany hung back, her phone aimed at my house like a weapon. The doorbell rang. Teresa looked up from her notes, then at me. "Are you expecting someone?" "My son." I moved toward the door, each step feeling like walking through water. David stood on my porch, his face drawn. "Mom, I tried to call." I pushed past him, down the steps, straight toward Brittany. She raised the phone higher, her lips moving as she narrated for her recording. My feet carried me across the lawn, the wet grass soaking through my house slippers. The cold bit at my ankles. "Turn that off." My voice came out steady, harder than I'd known it could be. Brittany smiled, the expression cold and calculated. "I'm documenting everything for the children's safety." "The children's safety?" The words exploded from me. I grabbed for the phone. She jerked it away, stumbling backward. David rushed between us, his hands out, pushing us apart. "Mom, stop!" His palms pressed against my shoulders. "You're not helping." Brittany's phone was still recording, capturing my rage, my desperation. Evidence of the unstable grandmother, the dangerous woman. Exactly what she wanted. Teresa appeared in my doorway, her radio already in hand. The static crackle cut through the November air. I stepped back, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. David's grip on my shoulders tightened, holding me in place. "I never hurt them." The words came out broken. "I love those children." "Love?" Brittany's voice dripped with mock concern. "You filled their heads with stories about boiling bones and grinding herbs. Sophia has nightmares now. Marcus won't eat anything that isn't sealed in a package." The lies stacked up, each one building on the last. I lunged forward again. David's arms wrapped around me, holding me back. My slippers slid on the wet grass. We nearly fell, a tangle of limbs and desperation. Storyblock 610. Teresa's radio squawked, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the chaos. My neighbor spoke in low tones, her body angled away from us, creating a barrier between my property and the spectacle unfolding on the lawn. Other neighbors had emerged now. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down stood on her porch, arms crossed. The Hendersons' teenage son held up his own phone, recording everything. David released me. I stumbled forward, caught myself. My knees threatened to buckle. The cold had worked its way up through my soaked slippers, numbing my feet, making each step uncertain. Brittany circled around David, keeping him between us, her phone still raised like a shield. "Look at her!" Brittany's voice projected across the yard, playing to the invisible audience she was building. Completely unhinged, this is what my children have been exposed to. I pressed my palms against my thighs, forcing myself still. My breath came in ragged gasps that turned to fog in the morning air. The medication bottle in my house, the one with the label I couldn't read without glasses, sat on my kitchen counter. Proof of something, though I didn't know what story she'd spin from it. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Teresa lowered her radio, her face apologetic. She mouthed, "Sorry," across the space between us. The patrol car turned onto our street, its lights silent but present, painting everything in alternating red and blue. David moved toward Brittany, reaching for her phone. She twisted away, her free hand coming up to push him back. The gesture looked defensive, calculated. Another moment captured on video, the son choosing the mother over his wife. She'd edit that part out later, I knew. Keep only what served her narrative. The police car pulled to the curb. One officer emerged, then another. The first was young, couldn't have been more than 25. The second was older, gray at the temples, moving with the careful economy of someone who'd seen too much to rush. My heart hammered against my ribs. I forced my hands to my sides, made myself stand straight despite the trembling in my legs. "Someone called about a disturbance?" The older officer's eyes swept the scene, taking in my wet slippers, Brittany's phone, David standing between us, Teresa with her radio. "She attacked me." Brittany's voice cracked perfectly, just enough emotion without overselling it. "I came to pick up my children and she became violent." "That's not—" I started. The younger officer stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm." I am calm, but my voice shook, betraying me. My hands curled into fists, then released. The arthritis in my knuckles flared, sharp points of pain that grounded me. "I have video evidence." Brittany thrust her phone toward the older officer. "Everything is documented? Her erratic behavior, the threats, the physical aggression?" The officer took the phone, his face neutral as he watched. I couldn't see the screen from where I stood, but I knew what it showed. Me grabbing for the phone, me lunging forward, my face twisted with rage, context stripped away, leaving only incriminating seconds that damned me. David's jaw worked, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Brittany had done. My son, who I'd raised alone after his father died, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college, stood silent as my world collapsed around me. "The children are inside?" The older officer handed the phone back to Brittany. "With their great aunt." Brittany gestured toward my house. I insisted on supervision, given the circumstances. My sister hadn't answered my calls in 3 days. The realization hit like a fist to the gut. They'd gotten to her too. Fed her the same poison they were spreading to everyone else. The isolation tightened around me, a noose pulling taut. "Ma'am, I need to see inside the house." The officer looked at me now, his expression professional but firm. "You need a warrant." The words came automatically, though I wasn't sure if they were true. "We can obtain one, or you can cooperate." His tone suggested cooperation was my only real option. I turned toward my house, my sanctuary about to be violated by strangers looking for evidence of crimes I hadn't committed. The door stood open, the warmth bleeding out into the November morning. My cats would be hiding, spooked by the commotion. Inside, every personal thing I owned would be examined, judged, catalogued as proof of my unfitness. Brittany followed close behind the officers, David trailing after her. Teresa remained on her porch, her face troubled. The other neighbors watched, their phones capturing every moment for their social media feeds, for the neighborhood gossip chains, for whatever entertainment value my destruction provided. Block 710. The officers moved through my living room with gloved hands, lifting cushions, opening drawers. I stood frozen in the doorway while they documented my life with their body cameras. The older officer crouched near my fireplace, examining the herbs I dried there. Chamomile, lavender, mint from my garden. He photographed them from multiple angles. "What are these?" He pointed at the bundles hanging from the mantel. "Herbs, for tea." My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. He moved to the bookshelf next, pulling down volumes on natural remedies, on African spirituality, on my grandmother's rootwork traditions. Books I'd collected over decades, knowledge passed down through generations. He stacked them on my coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. The younger officer joined him, flipping through pages, pausing at illustrations of protective symbols and healing rituals. Brittany whispered something to David. He nodded, then walked toward my kitchen. I started to follow, but the older officer held up one hand. "Please remain here, ma'am." Through the doorway, I watched David open my pantry. He pulled out mason jars filled with dried herbs, roots, stones I'd collected from the creek behind my property. Each jar was labeled in my careful handwriting: elderberry, ginger root, sage. He set them on the counter in a line, his phone camera recording everything. "There must be 50 jars in here." His voice carried back to the living room. Brittany appeared beside him, peering at my pantry's contents. "The children said she made them drink strange teas, bitter ones that smelled like dirt." My hands clenched into fists. I'd given my grandchildren herbal tea exactly twice. Once when Jasmine had a cold, once when Marcus complained of a stomach ache. Gentle remedies my own mother had used on me. Both children had felt better within hours. Both had asked for more cookies afterward, laughing as they helped me bake. The older officer moved upstairs. His footsteps creaked across the floorboards of my bedroom, then the guest room where the children slept during their visits. I heard drawers opening, the closet door sliding on its track. My chest tightened with each sound, imagining his hands touching their stuffed animals, their clothes, the nightlights shaped like stars. Teresa entered through the front door without knocking. Her eyes were red, her mouth set in a grim line. She walked straight to the younger officer. "I need to make a statement." She didn't look at me. The officer pulled out a small notebook. Teresa swallowed hard, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan. "I've known Crystal 30 years. She's never—" Her voice cracked. "She's the kindest person on this street. She brings me soup when I'm sick. She watches everyone's kids. My granddaughter learned to bake in her kitchen. Brittany spun around, her face flushing. You weren't there. You don't know what happened behind closed doors. I know more than you think. Teresa's hands were shaking now, but she held her ground. I heard you and David arguing in your driveway last month. Heard you tell him you were tired of the kids spending so much time here? That Crystal was undermining your authority. The words hung in the air like smoke. David's jaw tightened. He set down the jar he'd been holding with enough force that it cracked against the granite counter. That's completely out of context, Brittany started. You said you needed them to choose sides. Teresa's voice gained strength. Your exact words. I wrote them down that night because they bothered me so much. The older officer descended the stairs, his arms full of more items from my home. Children's drawings I'd kept pinned to the wall. Photo albums. A quilt my grandmother had sewn, its pattern based on symbols of protection and love. He laid everything on my dining room table, like artifacts from an archaeological dig. Ma'am, can you explain this? He held up a small cloth doll, hand-stitched, that I'd made for Jasmine's 5th birthday. She'd named it Hope and carried it everywhere for months. It's a doll. I made it for my granddaughter. There are pins in it. He turned it over, showing me the straight pins I used to hold the fabric while sewing, still stuck in the hem where I hadn't finished the dress. My stomach dropped. I was making new clothes for it. The pins hold the pattern. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way this innocent thing could be twisted into something sinister. A voodoo doll, evidence of malicious intent, proof of the witch they wanted me to be. Brittany moved closer, her expression triumphant. The children said she talks to that doll, that it tells her things about them. They were playing make-believe. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. We had tea parties. We made up stories. That's what you do with a 5-year-old. The younger officer wrote everything down in his notebook, his pen scratching across the paper with mechanical precision. Every explanation I gave sounded weak even to my own ears. Each innocent detail transformed into something dark by their suspicion. Through the window, I saw more neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. Word had spread faster than I'd thought possible. Someone had brought a lawn chair. This was entertainment now, a real-life drama playing out better than anything on television. The older officer's radio crackled. He stepped outside to answer it, his voice too low for me to hear. When he returned, his expression had shifted, become more cautious. We're going to need you to come to the station for further questioning. Write block 8 below. Pure story, no labels. The handcuffs clicked around my wrists before I could fully process what was happening. Cold metal bit into my skin as the officer guided my hands behind my back. My shoulders protested the unnatural angle, arthritis flaring hot in joints that hadn't been twisted this way in decades. Is that necessary? My voice came out smaller than I intended. The older officer didn't answer. His hand pressed firm between my shoulder blades, steering me toward the door. My slippers scraped against the hardwood floor I'd polished just yesterday morning. The fabric of my house dress caught on the doorframe as they pushed me through, and I heard something tear. Outside, the crowd had swelled. 20 faces, maybe 30, all people I'd waved to at church, shared recipes with at the community center, held doors open for at the grocery store. Now they stared like I was a specimen in a jar. Mrs. Patterson clutched her purse to her chest. The Henderson boy held up his phone, recording. A flash went off somewhere to my left. Brittany stood on my front lawn with Megan and little Parker. The 5-year-old's face was buried in her mother's leg, but Megan watched me with wide eyes. I tried to smile at her, to somehow communicate that everything would be fine, that Grandma wasn't being taken away like a criminal. But my granddaughter flinched and looked away. The pavement burned through my thin slippers as they walked me down the driveway. Pebbles pressed into my soles. I stumbled on a crack I'd been meaning to have fixed for months, and the officer's grip tightened on my arm hard enough to leave marks. Someone spat at my feet. The glob of saliva landed on my right slipper, soaking through the fabric. I looked up to see who it was, but couldn't make out the face in the crowd. It could have been anyone. Everyone looked the same now, hostile, righteous, convinced. They opened the back door of the patrol car. The officer placed his hand on top of my head, pushing me down and into the vehicle like I'd seen in countless television shows. The vinyl seat stuck to my bare legs. The car smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat, and something else I couldn't identify. Something that made my stomach turn. Through the window, I watched Brittany lean down to Megan, whispering something in her ear. My granddaughter nodded solemnly. Parker had started crying, his small body shaking with sobs that I could see but not hear through the glass barrier. The door slammed shut. The sound ricocheted through my skull. The younger officer slid into the driver's seat while his partner took the passenger side. Neither looked back at me. The engine rumbled to life, and we pulled away from the curb. I twisted in my seat, watching my house recede through the rear window. The crowd had moved onto the lawn now, some of them peering through my front windows. Someone tried the door. "They're going in my house." The words came out flat, factual. "They're concerned citizens," the older officer said without turning around. We drove past the elementary school where I'd volunteered for 15 years, reading to children who struggled with words, helping them sound out syllables with patience their parents didn't have time for. Past the library where I'd organized book clubs. Past the church where I'd sung in the choir every Sunday for 40 years, my voice rising with the others in harmony that felt like touching something holy. All of it familiar, all of it foreign now. The station loomed ahead, squat and brick with narrow windows like suspicious eyes. They parked in a loading zone and extracted me from the back seat. More hands on my arms, more pressure guiding me forward. We entered through a side door that led into a corridor lit by fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. The booking area smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax. A female officer approached, her expression neutral and professional. She took my purse, my house keys, the small gold cross I wore around my neck. Each item went into a clear plastic bag that she sealed and labeled with mechanical efficiency. "Empty your pockets." "I don't have pockets." I gestured weakly at my house dress. She nodded and wrote something on her clipboard. Behind her, I could see a holding cell, empty except for a metal bench bolted to the wall. The bars looked older than the building itself, worn smooth by countless hands. They led me to a room with cinder block walls painted institutional beige. A metal table sat bolted to the floor. 2 chairs on one side, one on the other. A camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. The older officer pointed to the single chair. I sat. The handcuffs came off, and blood rushed back into my fingers with needle prick intensity. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the indentations the metal had left. "Someone will be in shortly." The door closed behind them with a hydraulic hiss. The silence pressed down like something physical. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too fast. My hands trembled on the table surface. I laced my fingers together to stop the shaking, but it only traveled up my arms instead. The clock on the wall showed 3:47. Through the small window in the door, I watched officers move past, their faces blurred. None of them looked in. The door opened, and a man in a rumpled suit entered, carrying a manila folder and a paper cup that steamed in the cold air of the interrogation room. He had gray hair, cut military short, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He sat across from me and opened the folder without meeting my eyes. The pages inside looked thin, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. He turned them slowly, making notes with a mechanical pencil. I watched the lead scratch across paper, the sound unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Mrs. Campbell, I'm Detective Barnes." He finally looked up, his eyes tired but not unkind. "Your son is here. He's waiting outside." My stomach dropped. Marcus? No, that wasn't right. My son's name felt heavy in my mind, weighted with all the years between us. James. My James had come. "Can I see him?" "Shortly." Barnes pushed the glasses up his nose and studied a document. "First, I need to understand what happened today," I told him. The words came easier than I expected, tumbling out in a rush that surprised me. About the 3 years since my grandson was born. About the birthday parties I wasn't invited to. The Christmas where I sat alone in my apartment watching old movies and eating leftovers. About Sarah's whispers to the children, planting seeds that grew into thorns. Barnes wrote steadily, filling page after page. His expression never changed, but his jaw tightened when I described showing up at the playground today, how my 5-year-old grandson had screamed and run when I called his name, how Sarah had pulled out her phone and started recording, backing away with the children behind her like I was pointing a gun instead of holding a bag of cookies I'd spent the morning baking. She kept saying, "Stay back, stay away from us," over and over. My voice cracked, making it look like I was chasing them. "Were you?" I took 3 steps toward them, just 3. I wanted my grandson to see my face, to remember me. I pressed my palms flat against the cold metal table. He's 5 years old, and he thinks his grandmother eats children. Barnes set down his pencil. He pulled a tissue from a box I hadn't noticed and pushed it across the table. I hadn't realized I was crying until the tissue touched my hand. The responding officers received a call about an aggressive individual harassing a family at the playground. When they arrived, multiple witnesses corroborated that you were following Mrs. Campbell. He paused, glancing at the papers. Following Sarah Campbell and refusing to leave when asked. The witnesses. I remembered their faces, the way they'd positioned themselves between me and Sarah's children. Protective strangers who saw an old woman in a house dress as a threat because a young mother with wild eyes had pointed and said danger. I understand this is complicated. Barnes closed the folder. Family situations usually are. The door opened again. James walked in and my breath caught. He looked exhausted, his shirt untucked on one side, his tie loosened. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd been crying. I could see the redness, the way he avoided looking directly at me. "Mom?" Just the one word, barely above a whisper. I stood without thinking. The chair scraped against the floor. Barnes held up a hand, a gentle gesture that stopped me from moving closer. "I'm going to step out and give you two some time." He gathered his papers and left the cup of coffee behind, still steaming. James sat in the chair Barnes had vacated. He put his hands on the table, fingers spread wide. I noticed a new scar on his knuckle, a fresh pink line against dark skin. He saw me looking and pulled his hands back into his lap. "Sarah's dropping the complaint." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I convinced her." Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. I gripped the edge of the table. But there are conditions. He finally looked at me directly, and what I saw in his eyes hurt more than the handcuffs had. You can't approach her or the kids. No more showing up places. No more surprise visits. James! Let me finish. He stood, paced to the wall, pressed his forehead against the cinder blocks. This has to stop, Mom. The way you've been acting, it's not healthy. Sarah's scared, the kids are scared, and I'm... His voice broke. I'm caught in the middle. I wanted to scream that it wasn't me who started this, that I was the victim of 3 years of systematic exclusion and slander. But looking at my son's bent shoulders, the defeated slope of his spine, I saw what my desperation had cost him. I'll do therapy. The word surprised me. Family therapy, whatever it takes. He turned slowly. Hope flickered across his face, tentative and fragile. Both of you and Sarah both. I stood, keeping the table between us like Barnes had wanted. Because this isn't just about me showing up at a playground. This is about 3 years of her poisoning my grandchildren against me, and I need to understand why. James nodded once, sharp and decisive. The gesture reminded me of his father, dead now 10 years but still present in these small genetic echoes. I'll talk to her. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Mom, stay away until we figure this out. Please. For me. I will. The door closed behind him. I sat back down in the single chair and waited for Barnes to return with whatever papers I needed to sign. Through the small window, I could see James in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing as he talked, negotiating my freedom with his wife. The coffee on the table had stopped steaming. Block 1010. The therapy room smelled of lavender and leather, 6 months of weekly sessions having made the scent familiar as my own perfume. I sat on the cream sofa, Sarah across from me in the matching armchair, the distance between us smaller than it had been in November. Dr. Helena Morrison, our therapist, had long since stopped needing to moderate every exchange. Lily asked to bake with me yesterday. I kept my voice level, reporting facts like we'd been taught. She said she wanted to learn my apple pie recipe. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap, then deliberately stilled. The gesture was new, a product of her own individual sessions working through anxiety her mother had seeded decades ago. I told James you should come for Sunday dinner, if you want. The invitation hung between us, imperfect and awkward. I wanted to grab it, clutch it to my chest like the lifeline it represented. Instead, I nodded once, accepting without desperation. I'd like that. Thank you. Dr. Morrison made a note, her pen scratching quietly. She'd explained early on that Sarah's accusations had roots in her own childhood trauma. A stepmother who'd actually been cruel, abuse that had never been addressed. When Lily started having nightmares at 5, Sarah's protective instincts had twisted into something darker, projecting old fears onto new situations. Understanding it didn't erase 3 years of damage, but it provided a foundation for rebuilding. After the session, I drove to the community center where I'd started volunteering. The senior reading program needed coordinators, and I'd discovered a talent for matching reluctant teenagers with books that spoke to their hidden wounds. Marcus, the program director, waved from his office as I passed, his gray dreadlocks swinging. The afternoon stretched before me, full and purposeful, in ways that didn't depend on my grandchildren's presence. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, sprawled on my kitchen floor at 3 a.m, realizing that building my entire identity around being a grandmother had made me vulnerable to its loss. I was more than that role. I had to be. My phone buzzed as I sorted through donated books. A text from James showed Lily at the kitchen counter, flour dusting her dark braids, her smile gap-toothed and genuine. "Practicing for Sunday," he'd written. I allowed myself 30 seconds to stare at the photo, memorizing the details. The purple shirt Lily wore, the mixing bowl I recognized from my own kitchen that I'd given Sarah years ago, the window behind them showing spring sunshine. Then I set the phone down and returned to the books, sorting them into age-appropriate stacks. The teenager assigned to me today arrived 10 minutes late, all attitude and slouched shoulders. Tasha, 15, court-ordered community service for shoplifting. She dropped into the chair across from my desk like her bones had given up. "I don't read," she announced, arms crossed. I pulled a slim volume from my prepared stack and slid it across the desk. "This one's different. Just try the first page." She rolled her eyes, but picked up the book. I watched her face as she read, the subtle shift in her expression when the words caught her. Her shoulders gradually lowered. After 5 minutes, she looked up, defenses slightly cracked. "Can I take this home?" That's the idea. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth, May pretending to be June. I parked outside James and Sarah's house at exactly 6 o'clock, the apple pie I'd made that morning still warm in its carrier. My hands wanted to shake, but I'd learned to breathe through the anxiety, to let it exist without controlling me. Sarah opened the door before I could knock. She'd cut her blonde hair shorter, the style suiting her angular face better than the long waves she'd maintained before. "You're right on time." "I brought pie." I held up the carrier like an offering. She stepped back, allowing me entry. The living room looked the same. Beige walls, family photos clustered on the mantel, toys scattered near the couch. But the photo arrangement had changed. There, between pictures of James and Sarah's wedding and the kids at the beach, sat a frame I recognized. Me holding newborn Lily, my face luminous with joy. It had been missing for 3 years. My throat tightened, but I kept walking toward the kitchen where I could hear Lily's voice chattering about her soccer game. Tommy sat in his high chair, 18 months old, and covered in what looked like applesauce. He saw me and smiled, reaching out with sticky hands. "Gamma." The name pierced through all my carefully constructed defenses. I set the pie on the counter and moved to him, letting him grab my fingers, his grip strong and sure. James appeared from the hallway, catching Sarah's eye in a silent exchange I couldn't read but chose to trust. "Dinner's almost ready," Sarah said. "Lily, set another place at the table." My granddaughter appeared from the living room, taller than I remembered, her face losing its baby roundness. She looked at me with cautious curiosity rather than fear, and I recognized the achievement in that shift. Months of therapy, of careful reunification supervised by Dr. Morrison, of James and Sarah working to undo the damage. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart." We ate together, conversation stilted but present. Sarah asked about my volunteer work. James told a story about a difficult client. Lily described her soccer goal with dramatic gestures. Tommy threw food with impartial enthusiasm. The evening wasn't perfect, wasn't healed, but it existed. As I drove home later, pie plate empty in the passenger seat, I thought about the long road still ahead. Weekly therapy would continue for months. Trust would rebuild slowly, always fragile. Sarah and I might never be close, but we could be civil, could coexist in James and the children's lives without poison. The house I returned to wasn't empty anymore, not the way it had been during those dark months. I'd filled it with my own life, my own purpose beyond the roles others assigned me. The grandmother title was part of me, but not all of me. I was enough, all by myself. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.